Gonna let a few more people in, but why don't we go ahead and get started. Thanks for everyone for jumping in. I know some people are still digesting their lunch. I hope they keep you awake during that crucial period for the next 30 minutes to get you to the rest of the talks. My name is Chris Stauffer. I'm Director of Product Management at MongoDB. A lot of the talks you've heard about today are covering very specific areas. It could be time series, it could be AI. 7.0 talk is really a kind of a breadth kind of conversation. It's about everything that goes into our engine that we release on an annual basis. And so I'm going to be touching on a lot of topics today. Some I'm sure will interest you, some you may know about, and some you may have never heard of. And this is an opportunity to learn a little bit more. When we release 7.0, tons of new features and functionality. Pretty much everything I see you'll be able to try out. There may be some forward-looking statements, some, hey, tomorrow, soon, in the future, we might do X, Y, Z. Just keep that in mind that, you know, that's always subject to change, right? Both scope and scheduling. If you attended the keynote, I think Sahir did a great job of summing up the journey for MongoDB. Everything that's happened in 10, 12, 15 years now. Even in the last 5 years, from the last couple of versions we've had, adding features like transaction support, time series support, the ability to do live resharding, queryable encryption, all of that was announced at events like this, and we're excited to talk about what new features are available in 7.0. The other thing I want to stress is that obviously there's a big emphasis on Atlas and your experience in the cloud. But just know that this is still software, whether you're a community user or an enterprise user, you can download and use. And that's true for today, and it's going to be true, kind of forever. So everything you see here largely should be applicable whether you're on-prem or whether you're using the Atlas product. The 4 key areas we're going to cover, as we talked about in Keynote, the first one is always developer productivity. When I joined MongoDB 7 years ago, I knew it was a developer productivity company. I didn't realize until I actually started working here how much it's focused around developer experience. It sounds a little silly. You're like, hey, you got the word DB in your name. You must be database first. Pretty much every decision we make is keyed into what the developer experience is like. And so we're going to spend a lot of time covering that. We're also going to talk about areas of performance and also security, because we know for developers and for administrators how the system scales, how it performs with other workloads around it, as well as how security fits into not just your security team's sort of posture, but also your developers' responsibilities are increasingly important. And then, because we know a lot of you are hybrid users, you might have been using Community, you might have been using Enterprise, might be using Atlas now, we're going to talk about migrations as well, how you move data back and forth between those different environments. So let's dive in first into streamlined developer experience. In version 5 and 6, there were a number of features we rolled out. You don't have to read through them all here, right? But they really were enabling things like Atlas Search, analytics, working with data in new and different ways. And in 7.0, we're going to be adding a host of new operators, variables, and indexes to make working with your data a whole lot easier. The first one is the ability to approximate percentiles in aggregations. So one of the things we've heard from customers is, great, I can run analytics queries, but they aren't fast enough necessarily to run in real time. I can't batch this up, I can't cache this, I need to be able to give responses quickly. And so the ability to use a fast algorithm like tdigest now allows you in real time to calculate percentiles, whether it's 50th, 95th, 99th, or even things like what we call dollar median. It works across an array of documents. It also works across a window. And I'll give you some examples of how you might use it. Let's say, for example, you want to calculate a set of percentiles, and you're interested in a vacation rental listing sort of set of data. Now, you might be curious about, what's the median or what are the percentile values for those rentals to get an idea of what the balance is based on the various cities out there. If your data looks like this, you can now start using something as simple as dollar percentile. The idea is that you've got the ability to set which percentiles you're interested in. The aggregation is going to calculate those on the fly, and it's going to return that data out to you. You don't have to really think about, rolling this on your own. You don't need to figure out how to calculate it in a separate system. It's there and available to you. You've also got the ability to work off of a set of data that might be in an array. So something similar, let's say you're interested in review scores, which I think we all like to see. You go on and you look at restaurants, you go to, rent a place, you're interested in those review scores. Let's say that you're interested in understanding, well, what's the median, what's the 50th percentile for that listing? Now with something as simple as $median, you have the ability to put in the review score and basically get out the results. Now, for people who are looking closely, they might say, well, there's a method in there called approximate. What does that mean? That is using the T-digest algorithm that's kind of an industry standard. We're leaving it in there also because it creates the ability for us to add additional methods in the future. So right now, even though you can set it, it is the one and only option that's available. The next thing I want to talk about is not just working with something like not working with approximations, but also being able to work with fields that represent multiple data values, and that's bit masks. So the idea that you might be storing multiple values or want to be able to represent multiple values inside a single field is something we hear from customers. And so we're rolling out new operators for bit end or XOR in order for you to be able to extract data from those fields in a simple and straightforward manner. So let's say, for example, that you want to have a aggregation that is going to present data based on whether or not a certain bitwise operator returns true. In this case, we're interested in understanding if someone has the right permission. Okay? Right permission here is currently set by a value of 2, or its binary equivalent. With the new operators, you now have the ability to easily identify whether one person should have the right permission versus one person who shouldn't have the right permission. So simple, straightforward, allows you to work with bit masks a whole lot more easily. The next feature I want to talk about is not only working with how you represent or give you flexibility in aggregations, but also flexibility in view creation as well. So one of the things that people ask often is, well, I know something about the user role in my environment. Can I use that in some way to affect my aggregation or, in many cases, views? We've introduced this new variable called $user roles, which returns the list of roles associated with the user that's making the request. It can be accessed from aggregations and queries, but I think where we think it's going to be most potent is this idea with view definition. And so let me give you an example of how that would actually look. So before, if you wanted to create a view and you wanted that to be dynamic based on whether it was user A or B or role A or B, you'd actually have to create and manage those views individually, which is painful, right? You have basically duplicated 99% of what's there, and if you need to change it later on, you've got to go in and change both those views. More roles, more views, it's painful to manage. With the $, user roles, now you can create one dynamic view. And the idea is that you can generate the view conditionally on that user role variable. To give you an example, so if you had a document that you were trying to construct, but it was important that the customer contract was only visible to individuals with a certain role, you'd now have the ability to make it conditional on the $, user roles. And you can see that here. Sorry, I know it's bright and dark at the same time. You can make it conditional on the user roles role. And the idea is that that's one standard definition. In the future, if for some reason you need to change that view, you only change it in one place, and it impacts everyone who's taking advantage of that view. In addition to all of those, there's also big improvements we're making to time series. I gave a talk this morning on time series, not that you can go back in time, but if you're interested in it, there should be a video of it that you can watch later on today. The things I want to call out here, because we're going to talk a little bit about performance in a few minutes, are really the features around supporting arbitrary deletes and eventually arbitrary updates. So one of the things that's really common with time series data is that usually we think of it as something that's immutable. It's append heavy. We're basically storing data, newer and newer data over time, and usually the only time we do anything to it is when it falls off the end, right? We TTL it or clean it up later on. But there are definitely cases where we want to be able to delete data and update data as well. It could be bad data that you got from devices or sensors. It could be that your model has changed in some way and you want to update the data. Before that was difficult. You had to normally drop most or all of the data or update most or all of the data. And in 7.0, now you have the ability to do arbitrary deletes, which means you can be as precise or fine-grained in the criteria that you use for deleting that data. And in the near future, we're going to try to make that available for updates as well. So that's just another way we're trying to make time series pretty much an identical experience to all of your other data, but still give you the advantages in compression, storage, and performance from a time series database. In addition, outside of performance, I also want to call out partial TTL indexes. And I actually had a person come up earlier today and ask me about this. Before, you had the ability to TTL your data, which meant if, let's say, for legal reasons or even for storage reasons, you wanted to get rid of your data after, let's say, 30 days, you could set a TTL on that. And the idea is as you went to that 31st day, the data would be deleted. But in most cases, usually there's something conditional about it. You might have a free tier user, maybe a paid tier user, and you want to make it so that maybe the free tier data is good for 24 hours, the paid tier goes away after a month or 6 months. Now with partial TTL indexes, you can add pretty much as fine-grained criteria as you want in determining which data gets cleaned up and when. On top of that, with arbitrary deletes, it gives you a ton of control in working with time series data. And I know that I said there was a talk earlier this morning, but check out the video if you want to hear more about time series specifically. Another big area that we improved, which was a pain point for our customers, was compound wildcard indexes. So in 6.0 and earlier, if you wanted to use wildcard indexes, you could, but that was the only sort of index or the only field you could index on, which is to say that you needed to be willing to consider an entire document's worth of data instead of being more precise or more prescriptive. So starting in 7.0, that was a little bit tough to see. If, for example, you had a multi-tenant environment where you had different sellers with different types of goods, and you wanted to make it really easy to query on characteristics of the products, but you still wanted to be able to filter on the seller ID or the quantity, you can actually do that now. And so as simple as something down here where you could say, I want to filter, I want to create an index on seller ID, name, stock, but also everything under attributes. Now you have the ability to answer cool questions like, for this specific seller, with who maybe is using materials made out of metal or aluminum, what products do they have that are low quantity-wise? All of that is possible with the wildcard index support. Change streams is also improving in pretty substantial ways. How many people in here use change streams? Does anyone? Okay, great. So if you use 6.0 and earlier, I think you might have seen the support for pre and post image capabilities, which means instead of just getting the new document that's changed, you actually have the ability to look at the document before it actually changed. So you could understand the delta between before and after. One limitation on that, though, was that because we have a document size limit of 16 megabytes, you might guess, well, if I get an event and that event in sum total is bigger than 16 megabytes, can it still give me the event? And unfortunately, the answer was no. We actually had a limit on it, which effectively halved the size of the events that we could report on. We've changed that now. And so we've made it so that now events that are being reported that have pre and post images that are up to 16 megabytes can be successfully reported. And so it introduces this new concept here called change stream split large event. And the idea there is that instead of just sending you one event, we give you a stream of events. Now, they are still in proper order. They're still resumable in all the ways that 6.0 and prior change events are. And the idea is that you get these fragments over time, you can process them, and if for any reason you get disconnected or have to reconnect, you resume on the fragment where you left off. You still have the ability to use the old methods, so if you don't use pre or post images and you're like, what is he talking about? Can I just use regular change streams? You've got that ability still available. Okay. In addition to things that I think every cluster type can take advantage of, there's, I'm sure, a subset of you who have used or will use sharded clusters. Sharded collections are one of the biggest features for our product. They enable horizontal scalability. And one of the biggest challenges, both historically and even in MongoDB 5 and 6, is that that challenging what should my shard key be question, right? And so shard keys, whether you choose the right shard key, is conditional on a number of different properties of that shard key. And I'm going to get into it. But starting in 7.0, we actually have a set of commands you can use that'll give you effectively guidance or insight into either a candidate shard key or your current shard key that you're looking to use. So starting in 7.0, you'll have the ability to run an analyze shard key command, and I'll show you what the metrics are that are returned there. So if, for example, you've never sharded before and you're considering sharding a collection, you can use this. If you've already sharded and you're thinking, well, how is it performing? Can I do better? You can use this. If you know it's performing not as well as you'd like and you want to use live resharding, which is available, you can use this command. And you can use it before you run it and get good insights to help you make the next best decision. Part of this analysis of shard key is also understanding how the traffic will actually flow once that shard key goes into effect. And so you also have the ability to control the sampling rate on both read and write queries on your live system based on that new shard key behavior. So in a way, we're letting you simulate what the traffic would look like in that new shard key environment before you actually have to go and make that switch. The properties that are available for analyze shard key cover areas of cardinality, frequency, and monotonicity. And so I don't want to put anyone to sleep here, right? But cardinality, right, is the number of unique shard key values that you might have. Typically, you want that to be as high as possible because that's going to allow you to spread the load out across as many shards as possible. Frequency is important in that even if you have a high cardinality, but you have a very high frequency for one of those shard keys, it might turn out that you end up with sort of a very hot shard or a lopsided shard. And then monotonicity is whether you're effectively always growing your shard key in a way that always dumps the latest, hottest activity on one shard. Typically, we want to avoid monotonicity. In addition to those properties, which you'll learn from the shard key analyze, you'll also be able to configure this query analyzer, which will tell you it'll tell you information around query routing patterns. It'll identify hot shards for you. And so the idea is you'll be able to spot early on exactly which shards might be impacted positively, negatively, or spread evenly with your new shard key. In addition to improving the administrative part of it, we also want to make sure that working with sharded collections is as similar as working with any other collections. And so to that effect, we knew going into 7.0 that there are a number of commands that commonly behave differently in a sharded collection than they do on an unsharded collection. And so these were ones around some basic find, update, and delete. And so to give you an example, in the update 1, in 5.0 and 6.0 and earlier, in order to execute an update 1, you didn't just have to provide the criteria you wanted to match against. You actually also needed to provide a shard key or a shard you were directly pointing towards, which isn't great because you might not know which shard it's actually sitting on. And that could be true for update many. It could also be true for delete as well. So starting in 7.0, you can update, delete on any field that you want. It doesn't need to include the shard key. It doesn't need to include the shard ID either. Now, the difference between these two is it's not totally magic, right? If you are executing this and you reasonably know which shard it lives on, then you are going to see a performance improvement if you target one shard in particular. But you have the option now of either using a more highly optimized version, which targets one shard, versus using just any criteria, which potentially will go to multiple shards, but will match the non-sharded behavior. In addition to sharding, in addition to a whole host of features, I also want to talk about some sharding improvements when it comes to performance. It's kind of our next biggest category. So one of the things we introduced in earlier versions of MongoDB was the ability to defragment your sharded collections. The idea being that if you had a sharded collection made up of what we call many chunks, that at times it was actually more efficient to reduce those number of chunks to the fewest number possible. We added that as a feature in earlier versions, and after a lot of success with it with customers, we've actually rolled out what we call auto merger. So auto merger is going to automatically defragment these chunks over time. Now the cool thing about it is that, one, it happens in the background, and it operates on individual shards, and it's not moving data between the shards. It's really about identifying contiguous chunks and then combining them down and updating what we call our sharding routing table. It has a significant improvement in performance overall, and it costs very little to run or operate on your system because it doesn't require any migration of data. Here's sort of a graphical kind of representation, which probably what you would have expected if you've seen defragmentation in other cases. The performance improvements are substantial. We've seen, in many cases, up to 30, 40% decrease in latency for the sections of our code that are relying on sort of sharding routing behavior. And so if you're using sharded collections and you're moving to 7.0, this is something you can look forward to. In addition to improvements on the sharded collection side, we've rolled out an entirely new query engine. And we actually have a separate talk today. I don't know if it's been earlier in the day or later in the day. Has anyone gone to it or is going to it? This is a deep dive into the query engine, SBE? No? Okay. Later. Okay, great. So some of the query folks are going to take you through a deep dive into basically an entire from the ground up rewritten query engine that's rolling out with 7.0. It's going to impact nearly every stage of both finds and aggregations, but in particular, it's going to positively impact cases where you're using groups and reshaping, filtering and sorting, as well as dollar lookups. The substantial improvement here is anywhere from 50 to 90% performance improvement in those individual stages. So if you are running queries that are heavyweight in these types of operations, which I expect many of you to be using some form of this, you're going to see substantial performance improvement in 7.0. In addition to performance improvements, we also are investing a lot in stronger security. And like all things at MongoDB, we're doing that very much with a developer mindset. The first one, which there's been talks about both with the 7.0 GA, but I think at this conference as well, is queryable encryption. So queryable encryption is truly unique because it allows developers right at the point of development to make a choice about encrypting their data, really without having to worry about all the complexities around encoding, decoding, or reasoning about encryption in the system. The most powerful thing about queryable encryption is twofold. One is that it is end-to-end, which means in an Atlas environment, it's going to be encrypted on the client side by you. It is going to go into the database, and we will be able to query on it without ever actually decrypting the data. Currently, we support match, but this idea of being able to query against the data even when it's encrypted is hugely powerful. It's something that allows us as a company to feel even stronger about our security posture, and I think for all of you wondering about where data is encrypted, decrypted, adds an additional level of confidence in your own workloads. The other piece I want to cover is improvements in OpenID Connect support. So one of the things we've made sure of is that now you have OIDC, right, or identity federation support for your database access. And this is true for all of the major providers now. And this is integrated through your SSO, but is supported right out of the box and easy to configure. In addition, similar support is available for our drivers as well. There's a host of other additional security features, and we have a talk on it as well, so I recommend you check it out. But everything from improving X509 support to driver support, and also OpenSSL 3.0, which I'm not sure what versions people are on right now, but it feels like everyone always feels like they're really behind on OpenSSL support. 7.0, and actually, I think actually even 6.0 and beyond have been supporting it, but 7.0 and beyond are officially supporting it going forward. The last topic I want to cover is around migrations, which is, this isn't about coming from one company to another. This is about the journey I think many of our customers have going from community to enterprise, enterprise to Atlas, or jumping between those two. And so streamlined migrations is really important for us. In earlier versions, we had rolled out the ability to synchronize data in a more general form, not just for migrations, but for continuous synchronization. And we called it cluster-to-cluster synchronization, or Mongo Sync. Now, the idea here is that we wanted to make it simple for customers to have continuous unidirectional synchronization of the data in a way that didn't feel like you were writing your own scripts or you're using a third-party tool. You didn't know if there were consistency guarantees. You didn't know what happened if the process crashed. We wanted to build it robust and fully supported end-to-end. And so we've improved on that for a number of key use cases. The most notable, which is a highlight for today, is migration. But we also recognize that cluster-to-cluster synchronization is used in dev and test environments. For example, maybe you have a production environment, but you want to be able to synchronize data to a dev environment to better test your CI/CD story. You might have audit and compliance reasons that you want to be able to push data, as well as analytics. So all of those are supported, and a number of features I think are going to make it even more of a reality for you. The first one is filtered sync. So previously, you kind of had to be all in or all out. You had to say, well, this is the database and this is the cluster that's going to be synchronized, and it's going to go and do its thing. Now you've got the ability to be selective around databases and even down to collections. So for the dev test scenario, now you can pick out just the thing you want, right? For the audit or for the analytics, again, just give them what they need. You can do that efficiently and confidently. At the same time, you don't need to make an exact copy of what's going on out there. In addition, you now have the ability to work with unlike topologies, which is really slick. So let's say you have a sharded cluster and you want to send some data, but you don't want to send it to the same 800-pound gorilla sharded cluster, right? Maybe you want to send it to something smaller. Or maybe you're on a replica set and you realize you think you got to go to sharded cluster. How do you explore that option? Mongo Sync is going to do that for you. So it's going to transform it during the process. It allows you to specify things like shard keys. And the ability is now you can test unlike topologies from your source topology. So you want to go from unsharded to sharded, you can do it. You want to go from sharded, with a certain number of shards to a different number of shards, you can do it. All of that's possible for all of the use cases that I just said. So M to M, M to N, from a replica set to a sharded cluster. And then finally, we also want to make sure, right now you've got the ability to use it in Atlas. You also have the ability to download the tool. You can still download the tool and use it to your heart's content, but we've now integrated most of the core functionality for migration purposes into Atlas Live Migrate. So has anyone here used Atlas Live Migrate? Chance? Okay. If you haven't, that's fine. So if you go into your cluster in Atlas, you actually have the ability for the cluster you create. It's a little like it's like a little hamburger or a little ellipsis. You click on it, and it says migrate data. When you click on that, it'll actually spin up an instance of Mongo Sync. It'll take your source cluster information, and it'll immediately proceed to start synchronizing and migrating that data for you. So all of that's integrated in there. And that's important because as you identify new workloads that you want to consider for MongoDB, you clearly want a push-button way to do it. You want something that you can monitor, and you also want something that will allow you, in many cases, to transform the data when and where you need it. So for example, let's say you want to migrate data, but you don't want to migrate all of it. Maybe it's just one database. This will let you do it. Let's say you want to bring it from a replica set, but you think it'll need to go to a sharded cluster. This will allow you to do it, and it'll allow you to do it from the Atlas UI. And that's it for the 4 main topics here: streamlined developer experience, performance, security, and migrations. And I thank everyone for taking their time and staying awake after lunch.